The definition of conviction is a firmly held belief. Leadership looks different for each person, but every leader has strong convictions that pave the way for how they guide their people. Whether you're an experienced leader, a current leader, a novice leader, or a soon-to-be leader, this podcast is a must for you. Through this show, you will hear leaders share their convictions, the struggles they face, and the challenges they have overcome by staying true to their convictions. Leadership can be hard and it can be lonely. I aim to connect you with leaders who have walked the journey and want to show others the way. This is Beau Vincent, and you're listening to The Conviction of a Leader. Welcome back to The Conviction of a Leader. This is Beau Vincent, and I'm excited to have an awesome guest, Bradley Hamner, with me today. Bradley, how are you?
I'm doing great, Beau. Thanks for
Hey,
having
I'm
me.
excited to return the favor, I should say. But honestly, I didn't feel like I owed you a favor. I felt like I wanted you on this podcast, and finally it's lined up because Bradley is a business growth coach. For anybody out there who's not familiar with Bradley, I'm gonna introduce him. Bradley is a business growth coach. He's founder and CEO of Blueprint OS. He's a keynote speaker. He's a podcast host of Above the Business, which is where he had me as a guest. I believe it was last year, which Bradley has a phenomenal podcast. And I'd love to take that blueprint of an OS and take that and put it into mine because you've created such a great business podcast. And I actually look up to you and what you've been able to accomplish through that. Father of two kids, 13-year-old boy, 9-year-old daughter. And he has ownership and equity in several businesses, which is why he is on today to talk about leadership and entrepreneurship. Bradley, thanks for joining me.
I'm super excited about the
Oh,
conversation. And yeah, people should definitely check out your episode, not for me, but for you. It was great having you on, and you always show up with just tremendous energy. So it's an honor to
well,
be on
thank
here.
you. I'm so glad that you could join us. And yeah, that was a great podcast interview. You do such a good job, and you brought out some good things from me in that podcast. So definitely check out Above the Business with Bradley, and we'll put that in the show notes, Bradley, so that people can connect and listen to specifically that episode, but also all of them. Because Bradley, how many episodes are you up to now? You've been doing this for a while.
Yeah, I think we just crossed over 350.
Whoo! We had 30 some episodes last season, and I had to take a break because consulting got out of hand, if I'm being honest, and which is so great because I think podcasting actually helped create a little more just recognition to maybe who I am, and I say that humbly because I'm really just no one special. I think that I'm just somebody that's worked extremely hard at dreams that God's laid on his heart, but the podcasts like yours and the platforms have really helped bring, some growth to consulting, coaching, and my own business and insurance also. So Bradley, you started in insurance, or where did you start? Where'd your leadership journey, ownership journey start?
I actually will go back. When I graduated from Auburn, I was in sales. I was selling yellow page
Nice.
ads back then. So this is
So
like
you are a
2003,
true
2004.
salesman.
Yeah, well, I
No,
don't know
we
about
we
that,
won't.
but
I don't love that word, but yes, you understand. Okay.
yeah. And so then I made my way into
Mm-hmm.
pharmaceuticals, and I had a couple opportunities after my first couple years of being a rep that I actually was able to lead some small groups and would be considered now masterminds
Mm.
in the corporate world. And that was really my first taste of leadership. And then also, I'm a big golfer. I love to play golf. And so golf was a big part of my life in college, and still in a lot of
Yeah.
ways is today. But I say that to say that I'd gotten on some leadership boards like the Auburn Huntsville Auburn Club for a period of time, the Huntsville Country Club board, et cetera.
Yeah.
And so those were some I was kind of thrown in the fire in some as of around leadership really early on, even before I started my business.
Nice. Nice. I love that. So when you started your business, let's talk about the journey of like starting your first business. How did you do it? Why did you do it? And where has it gone from to where we're at today? I mean, you've seen immense growth. At least I've seen it from the outside, knowing you and your biography and background history. It's impressive. I'd love to dive more into your journey.
So my dad is a small business owner,
Oh,
and I think that that is really important. So my dad's a farmer, and he
wow.
also owns a seed conditioning company, which is basically we'll refer to it as seed cleaning. So say you're a farmer that gets wheat, soybeans
Hmm.
out of the field, and then you need to get it bagged, and so that's my dad's
Wow.
business. And so I say that to say I had really bad allergies and was never able to work in that business. However, I wish I could go back, and I love my dad to this day. We have a great relationship, but I wasn't taught a lot of things from my
Mm.
father, but I caught a lot of
Ooh,
things
I like
from
that.
him. And the biggest, without a doubt, is how hard he worked and how hard he has still worked up to this day. He is probably as
So
hard as
good.
I work. He works harder than really anybody. And he's 68 years
Ooh,
old and runs laps around most people. Now, do I think he needs to be able to learn how to take a break and
yeah.
delegate some
Yeah.
things? Yes, I do. But he's in a really tough industry. And so through that, there was obviously some sacrifices, missed games, not being able to shoot basketball with me in the driveway, not being able to be the coach of some of my baseball teams growing
Hmm.
up, and not going to golf tournaments and things of that nature. But I caught hard work from my father. And so the idea of entrepreneurship and being a small business owner was really in me at a really young age. And so I knew or had this idea that I wanted to do it, but I didn't really know what it was going to
Yeah.
be. And so, ironically, I was at the golf course and somebody tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Hey, I think you should go and start this business." And I was just about to move to Chicago. I was just about to move to Chicago and take a job in corporate
Hmm.
America, and I decided, you know what? I think that I love sales. I love leading people. I think this sounds like a great opportunity. Why don't I take the risk? Start out with no customers, very little cash, start from scratch. Why don't I take the leap? If anybody can do it, I felt like I could
Yeah.
do it. I was, young at the time. And I was young and honestly quite naive. I mean, really, the amount of thought that I actually put into whether or not weighing the options was very little.
Yeah.
I just literally
Took a
took the
jump.
leap and took the jump in 2009.
Wow. So how has it evolved from that all the way to where you're at today? Because correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like now you are consulting other business owners. So how did you evolve from that to where you're at to today?
A lot
Yeah,
of
right?
pain, a lot of mistakes, a lot of struggles, so many things that I did
Hmm.
wrong. And so I said that early on I was experienced or
Hmm.
exposed, not experienced, but exposed to leadership opportunities with, boards that I was a
Yeah.
part of. But truthfully, Bo, I did not know what I was
Yeah.
doing. I did not go and have someone sit me down and say, this is actually how you lead
Mm.
people. I was at the time early in my career, I was not a reader.
Hmm.
I didn't listen to podcasts. I don't even know when podcasts really came out. So I
Yeah.
didn't listen to podcasts. I did not read books. I mean, truthfully, before say 2013, 2014, which now I'm 3 years or so into my
Hmm.
business, I think I'd read maybe less than 3 or 4
I'm
business
glad that
books,
we're on the
okay?
same
Now
page
I'm
back then.
I really
Yeah.
didn't. I mean, and so, I jumped into it. I had one skill. I had one skill and I had some character traits. I had one skill of being able to sell. I think that that was shaped from selling Yellow Pages and then in the pharmaceutical days. And I think also I caught some of the stuff of networking from my mom and from my
Hmm.
dad. But I knew I had the character trait of hard work. So I knew I had those things at play. But honestly, I really struggled the first several years. I got the business up to a certain
Hmm.
point, and then eventually I started to run out of time. I'll share with you, you and I were talking
Yeah.
about social
Yeah.
media. I share this story. often whenever I'm talking to
Mhm.
people a couple times a month that in 2015, it is June of 2015, I have a picture of one of my like early
Mhm.
Instagram posts that I made. And it's a picture in the Disney lobby that I'm with my family on a
Mhm.
trip. There's two computers up, and the caption says, "Better never stops, even on vacation." And it has hashtag team meeting. Now, let me tell you about a few things. Number one, I'm at Disney and I'm running a weekly team
Mm.
meeting. I felt like that business was so dependent upon me, and it's what I now call a hand crank
Yeah.
business. Like it needed me to crank the handle of that business
Mm.
every day, that I needed to be running a team
Mm.
meeting. And furthermore, when I cringe when I see that, because it's not just the running of the team meeting, it's the fact that I was proud that I was
Yeah.
there running a team, that I wanted to project out on social media. I'm on a trip with my family at Disney. My son's 5 at the time. My daughter's just about to turn 1, and I need to be running a Monday team meeting at 8 o'clock in the morning or something like that. Does that make
Oh,
sense? And
so
so,
resonates too.
well, fast forward a month later, I end up having what ended up being a full blown panic
Mm.
attack. And so I go to the gym, I'm working out, I run around the parking lot. I started feeling pains in my
Mm.
chest. I call a physician
Wow.
friend of mine. He says, "Come in." He puts me in an EKG machine. And then he says, "Honestly, Bradley, I actually see some things on here that are really concerning to me." So now I'm in a full blown
Mhm.
panic at this point. He gets me in within the next day or so to see a cardiologist. And the cardiologist says, "Bradley, your heart's fine, but something needs to change in your life if you're this stressed out. You were having panic
Mhm.
attacks." And I'd never understood
Mhm.
that. Well, that's when I realized that I had I was at a crossroads. There were really 3 options, Beau, that I
Yeah.
had. One is I could one wasn't really an option, which was to work harder, and I was already gas pedal
Yeah.
down. Pedal was on the ground. So there is no more working hard, and which is why I go back to say that I picked that up from my
Right.
dad. That was what my dad was doing.
Mhm.
I was doing and modeling exactly what my father was
Mhm.
doing. Does that
Oh,
make
yeah.
sense? So I couldn't work any
Right.
harder. So that one really wasn't an option, or truthfully, there was going to be legitimate health concerns down the
Yeah.
road. Secondly, I could give up. Now, I had not shared really with anybody because I did this kind of quietly. I actually ended up looking up pharmaceutical manager jobs. And so I knew I could go back into the industry, go back into the corporate
Mhm.
world, get a $200,000 base salary, company car,
Right.
401k, health benefits, and just go do that. Well, that was way more money than I was making as an entrepreneur at the
Mhm.
time. Okay. And so, but that was me waving the white flag of basically saying I failed. Now, interestingly enough, I now verbalize, Beau, that I think that businesses fail, but people don't. But at the time, my self worth as a human
Ooh.
being, as a
Yeah.
man,
Let's hear it.
as a
Mhm.
man, was put into whether or not that was going to
Wow.
succeed. And there was a lot of things pointed to, honestly, Bradley probably should just give it
Mm.
up. And so fast forward, I said, well, there's got to be another option. Now, I did not know what that other option was, but I started to say, look, I'm going to give this one more shot. I'm going to give this one more shot to try to begin to turn this around, make some changes. And I wish I could tell you it happened
Mhm.
overnight, but I'll tell you there was a moment that happened a few months later. I was in Toronto at Strategic Coach. I'm sure you've heard of Strategic Coach, Dan
Oh, yeah.
Sullivan, incredible entrepreneur coach. So I'm in a group, but I'm actually in the wrong group, meaning the group that I was a part of, the dates didn't
Mm.
work out. And so they said, hey, we can get you in this other group. And it was actually a little bit of a higher level group. Now, I say that to say that's not boastful. It was just honestly, that's the only dates
Yeah.
that worked out. I'm in this group and they're doing an exercise. And ironically enough, this book has actually come out. It's the book that Dan Sullivan and Ben Hardy have just recently came out with last year called 10X is Easier Than
Mm.
2X. So we're doing that exercise. This is late 2015. We're doing this exercise, and I'm next to a guy I'd never met before, but he was I'm tall and he's a really tall guy and he's super fit and he's got his hat
Uh-huh.
backwards. Okay. He's like this in the group. Now, everybody else is kind of
Yeah.
dressed up and he is like hat backwards, just really laid
Yeah.
back. And so we do this exercise and he says, you take your revenue and your personal income, you multiply it times 10. And you begin to think, what would need to happen to get to these levels? And I was like, well, that's interesting. So then we do the exercise
Yeah.
ourselves and then we pair up. And this guy I'm sitting next to, and honestly, I wish I knew his name, could go back, but I'm sitting next to him and he does the exercise. And I'll never forget this moment. He says, okay, so last year we did 40 million and I made 5 million personally. So if we 10x'd it, the business would be doing 400 million and I'd make 50 personally. And so here's what that would look like. And he was so matter of fact, and my jaw was on the floor. Now, Beau, I'm gonna tell you, I'd never been in an environment, one, that people openly were talking about
Like
revenue,
that.
and he actually ended up showing profitability and his personal income. It made me super
Yeah.
uncomfortable because I was like, everybody else is good talking about sales. We'll talk about sales numbers, but we're not going to talk about revenue, profit, and personal income. And so he just shared them. And then he says, okay, now you go. And I said, I'm not going. Are you kidding me? You made $5 million personally last year. And he was kind of like, yeah, I mean, this is what it was. And I said, I'm not going to go. I'm embarrassed by my numbers here. I'm not going to share this with you. And he was so kind. And he said, no, just, I was there too. What are your numbers? And so I kind of pushed the paper over to the side and he looked at me. He said, listen, I was there just a few years ago. It's exactly where I was. And he said, you know, it was really systems and processes and people that changed my business. And I remember rolling my eyes and I said, man, I've heard so many people tell me that. And nobody ever shows me actually what that
Yeah.
looks like. Everybody
True.
says that and nobody says what it actually is. He says, ask me at lunch and I'll show you. And he pulls his computer. We go to lunch and he pulls it up. And I remember him fiddling through several different Word documents. And I remember how beautiful the documents
Yeah.
were, how detailed they were. And I was like,
Phew.
oh, that's actually what it
Mhm.
takes to scale a company to $40 million. That's how he was a financial advisor, actually. And he owned, then of course, he built a financial advising
Mhm.
company in Canada, but he had went from a one person
Mhm.
advisor making a few hundred thousand to then owning a company that actually did that. And that ultimately changed my life. And so it was that span of roughly 6 to 9 months that began to get me to realize, oh, okay, there's got to be a
There's
different way to do
yeah.
things. And so from that point, everything began to
Wow.
change.
I mean, honestly, that was a phenomenal journey and story that you took us along. You're actually a great storyteller, and I'm sure you know this, or at least you've worked at it because on your podcast you're great at storytelling too. But I think definitely took me through the journey. Felt like I was with you, but it also reminded me of a couple parallels in our lives. Of my dad was one of the hardest workers I've ever met, and I caught a lot from him, but he didn't teach a lot. Also, and you know, there was times in my life where I almost held it against him,
Hmm.
not me. But now I'm at a point where I should be thankful for what I actually did learn from him. And my dad has had a tough journey in life with deaths and failures and addictions and prison. And I mean, it's a wild journey. But what I can tell you is I learned from some of the great things he did, but also some of the bad things that happened in his life about how I didn't want to be like that.
Hmm.
So I'll tell you this, my dad's lowest low lined up with something that you said. And I went to pick up my dad to take him to rehab, and he had been gone or missing or left for a couple weeks. He had just spent my mom's and dad's entire life savings, and my mom found out he just disappeared. When I found him, I believe it was somewhere in downtown Akron, which is a suburb city in Ohio, and I had to pick him up and I was taking him to rehab. And my dad never cried. He cried one time before I was 13 that I can remember. He cried when his sister died, which was on my birthday, the day before my birthday. And he woke up on, was sitting at the end of my bed when I was 13. And he said, your Aunt Rhonda died last night. And it was his only sister, his closest confidant and friend, because they went through some traumatic childhood together. So you think, and unfortunately she took her own life, but that just added to the struggle in my dad's life. And he tells me, in the car ride, he says, I should just end my own life because I have no more value left. I can't provide financial income to anybody anymore, let alone myself. And what's sad is that my dad's worth and value in life was directly attached to his success and his income. And it was just so
Mhm.
sad and heartbreaking to me. And I was early 20s. So I actually learned some really big, I'm talking like on the spot, like cold turkey learned. I don't have to think back on it. Like I learned that day that, wow, I can never attach my value as a man, as a father, as a person to my financial income and the success of my business because it can go away. And every any point it goes away, so does all my worth. And so I'm glad
Yeah.
that you brought that up because he was not a delegator and he worked hard. And when he failed, like so did it essentially his life. So, wow, it's good to dwell on those things actually to learn from.
How old were you when that occurred?
So I would have been early 20s, maybe 23, about 23 years old, which, but you take it as I was the oldest sibling, and my sister is the youngest. She's about 7 years younger. So if I was 23, she was like 16. They kind of grew. They were my younger brothers and sister were more used to my father struggling. I saw my dad go from print press operator to regional manager of a waste, like a waste management, a trash company, to his own business. So I saw the come up of my dad. They saw the fall of my dad. So a little different life, but the signs were there when I was in high school because the older you get, the more you start to notice things around you. And I started to notice his struggles with pills and whatnot, finding pill bottles in his car that had somebody else's name on it. But how do we connect all that back to being a greater leader? Because I actually think that leadership starts in my household and the way that I can lead my own self first and foremost. And take because my dad couldn't, he struggled to take care of himself, which actually impacted him leading anybody. So I
Mm.
learned it started with me in order to lead other people. But I appreciate you telling that story that we have some parallels that line up. Obviously, your dad continues to work hard and has overcome, a lot, I was sure, in his life where my dad has maybe succumbed to some of those failures. So but thank you for bringing that up. I mean, it's impactful to both of our journeys and where we're at today. So
Yeah. I think that if you'd have told me years ago that I would in business and leadership be talking about things that from your childhood, I would have, rolled my eyes and thought that you're
yeah.
crazy. But you evolve, and I do think that I think a lot about this a lot with my kids right now. But I do think that you if you can go back and think about I think about the little boy
Mm,
Bradley and what are those experiences, not necessarily bad, but some of them bad, some of them not as good, and how they impacted me and my own
mm,
journey of being a
so
business
true.
owner. And even to this day, I think it's helped me to have a better understanding of, how I react to certain situations. Like what are the parts of me that are really struggling around that? Why did something bother me so much? Why did I, because I think as an entrepreneur, like we can be emotional
Oh
at
yeah.
times, right? We can be emotional. And emotional, I say that as in like we can be super
Hmm.
energetic and we can get people bought into a
Right.
vision of where the thing is
Yes.
going. And they're like, I'm buying into Beau of where it's going to go and how they just want to be on the ship with you, or to use Lencioni's, or no, not Lencioni's, who am I trying to think of? Get on the
Okay.
bus, right?
Yeah.
They want to get on
They
the
want to
bus with
ride.
you. And so,
Yeah, they
huh?
want to ride on the bus with you. Yeah.
Yeah, they wanna be
Hmm.
on the bus with you, and so but at the same time, those emotions that we have at times can sometimes work
Oh
against
yeah.
us, I think, into as well.
I totally agree. I'm glad you brought that up because I was actually talking to somebody on the podcast recently, and then just in my life about how kids like my son is so driven with impulse. And so many teachers are talking about the impulse, and this and that. And he's a leader, and he's a
Mm,
clown, and all this stuff, class clown. But actually, I brought up the leadership side about how actually, if we channel his passion and his energy and emotion into leadership because other people are following him away from you, if you engage that and task it to
Hmm.
he will respect you more and others will follow him in a different direction, because right now he's been emotional and impulsive and you've responded. I actually told a teacher this. I said, you've responded emotionally to my son, which now he does not respect you because you speak to him like he's not a human. I said, but he's a 12-year-old
Hmm.
human and he needs to be spoke to like one, because if I walked into your classroom and I said, hey teacher, you shut your mouth or you're going to the principal's office and he's going to write you up, how would you feel? Would you respond
Hmm.
well? I said, now I understand that he's impulsive and you have a class of 22 kids that have to sit there for 6 hours a day, and that is tough. But what I want you to think about is that he's a leader. And sometimes it's called critical mass is what I call it. If you can get the critical mass or the leaders to follow the real leader, the actual leader, then they will lead the students for you. I said, but he's decided he didn't like you by the way you emotionally responded to him. So he's decided to disrupt and lead people away from you because he doesn't like you. And that's a tough pill to
Hmm.
swallow, because I know I could do better, one, with my son, but also it's a tough pill to ask somebody else to swallow, to say, wow, you're trying to say that your son's struggles are my fault. No, it's not that. But emotionally responding to things that cause us to be emotionally could actually, if channeled incorrectly, cause more harm than good. So learning to channel your emotion is so important in leadership. Would you agree?
Oh my goodness, yeah. Emotional
Mm-hmm.
intelligence. I mean, right before we jumped on this podcast, I got a text from one of my clients and even somewhat business partner, and he's struggling with that very thing right now. Like his message said, "I'm struggling with being able to deal with employees," and he is very emotional
Yeah.
about that, right? And so he's wanting to lash out.
Right.
Honestly, he's wanting to lash out. He's
Mm-hmm.
frustrated, and some of it I understand why he's frustrated. So it's not like
It's
whether or not he
warranted,
should be
essentially.
frustrated. It's how does he respond in the moment, right? Because he could do so much damage depending on how he
So true.
responds. That's hard to take back. And I look back on that so many times, that because of the way I responded in certain situations, then whenever I went back to the team and I would run a one-to-ones or run a weekly team meeting, you know what they end up doing? They end up saying what it is they think that I want to
Mm-hmm.
hear, versus honesty and
So true.
transparency and truth. Because then they're like, you know what? We're not actually going to say how we feel, because if we do, we know how he's going to
Mm-hmm.
respond. And therefore, we're just not going to do that. So we'll not bite our lip. We got to say something. We'll just basically lie
Mm.
to him.
Yeah.
And that was a function of my own self and poor leadership and poor emotional
Right.
intelligence.
But we have a value in our office about being honest and telling the truth. And I actually have a way that I teach people to do it, because, yes, I struggled too. And a lot of those things that you learned or I might have learned probably came from leadership that we had at some point, father, somebody in our life that taught us that, hey, you do not challenge the leader, you go with the leader. And what I learned though is that I was encouraging people to lie to me, which actually I was
Yeah.
encouraging to surround myself with liars that just told me what I wanted
Yeah.
to hear. When I actually started to realize that, I started to tell people, and I do this in orientation now. When a new team member starts, I start out by saying, "Hey, we value the truth here, and here's how we value it, and here's how we express it." So I teach them. I
Mhm.
reprimand in private, I praise in public. Now I'm going to put that in terms for you, Bradley. If you disagree with what I have to say, a process, something that I say on a conference call in front of other people, I would appreciate if you would reprimand me in private, not in public, because I won't do that to you. I won't get on a call and say, let's talk about Bradley being late today. What a loser. Do not be like him, or talk about Bradley's failures in front of other people. So we teach people, because that's what we should do as leaders, is to give them the avenue to express how they feel, because most people just want to be heard. They don't need you to do everything that they want you to do. They just need to know that you have your ears open to understand where they're coming from.
Yep.
And that's it. And sometimes, what's funny is that I've had I don't want to say knock on wood, but like way less problems the last 4 years by allowing people to just be honest with me, tell me my process sucks or the process sucks, because now I don't even create processes. I mean, I might bring up a problem and I want to task the leaders or those in the position to help me solve it. I don't want to be the one solving all the problems, because I don't live in your life and your role anymore. And I think you guys are uniquely gifted in those positions to answer those. So yeah, but man, you're like a podcast host almost, the way that you're encouraging me to talk. So,
Well, I wanna say a couple things to
yeah.
that, which you mentioned. I actually interviewed someone the other day, and because I was curious around
Hmm.
this, and it was around a negotiation
Ooh.
actually is what she came on to discuss. She had been a negotiator in, like, Fortune 100 companies for a while. She negotiated with L'Oreal, or for L'Oreal, with Walmart as an example, et cetera, and so but one of the things that she mentioned,
Hmm.
and I wanted to bring it up, is, like, okay, yes, but in the moment when we're
Yeah.
frustrated that something has happened, how do we actually do that? How do we develop the skill? How do we take it from a theoretical level or a high level down to some eye level? And I think that pausing, just a slight pause
Mm.
oftentimes, because so often I like to be able to run off the cuff and shoot from the
Hmm.
hip, that as soon as something happens, I'm immediately drawn to
Yeah.
respond in some way. And I think a little bit of distance in those situations allows me to gather my
Hmm.
thoughts a little bit more and say, you know what, I think I can come back
Yeah.
to this. This doesn't need an answer or a
Yeah.
response right now.
Exactly.
This has happened at times in Slack. I get a message and I really want to fire
Yes.
off a message back to
Hmm.
somebody immediately. It really ticks me off. Okay. Which is why, we're both kind of being vulnerable
Hmm.
here with some things to say, like, leadership is really, really
Oh,
hard. Like, leading a business, leading people is really, really hard. And so I'll say, you know what? I'm gonna set that to the
yeah.
side. I'm gonna press a reminder 1 hour from now on Slack. I'll respond to this. This doesn't need me to respond at this moment, and that has helped me so
Mm.
much. It's like at times where people say, you know what? Like, if Elon Musk had a delay on his own Twitter account, it might would be better,
Yes.
right now. Okay, or somebody like
Hmm.
that to say, did you probably didn't need to send that in that
Yeah.
moment as an example, or say that. So I think that's one thing. The second thing is, and I just heard this yesterday, and I really love the analogy. And it says the monkey on the shoulder. And to your point, where you were saying, I don't want to be the chief problem solver, the idea is that with the team comes to us with problems, okay, and then they have the monkey on their
Hmm.
shoulder and they throw the monkey over to us,
That's.
right? And now this monkey is sitting on our
Hmm.
desk, basically, and at the end of the day, we've collected all of these monkeys that we then have to begin to actually, deal with. And guess what we do? We deal with it. We deal
Hmm.
with it really fast. We deal with it correctly. We deal with it the right way. But the problem is, though, we got to be able to get to a place to where we're not going to allow the team to just throw the monkey
Yeah.
on our shoulders, because then we're not actually developing them. We say we want
Yes.
to develop, or I
Yes.
used to say I want to develop people, but I actually wasn't developing them. I was just
Solving.
solving the
You were the.
problems
Yeah.
for them, as opposed to actually helping them to be able to say, what do you do? So I'll share with you. I got this from one of my coaches, Dan Martell. He's a fantastic entrepreneur. So this is his
Hmm.
model, his framework, not mine. It's called the 131. And so it is like, what is the problem?
Yep.
What are three potential solutions that you have? And which one do you think is the best? 131. And that has been a great framework for me to use to say, well, Beau, what's the
Mm.
131 on that? And it becomes a forcing function for them to be able to be very clear on, this is the problem we need solved. Okay. This is the issue I have. Here's three potential options that I came
Mm.
up with. This is the one that I think is best. And a lot of times the team, I'll say, well, what's the 131? And they're like, you know what? I'll get back with you. Okay. And that has been
Yeah.
super helpful to then force them to come back. And a lot of times, maybe half the time, they were like, never mind, I
Yep.
got it. And they just move
True.
on. And so I think that helps us in actually developing
You know,
people.
it's those are some great thoughts and great advice also. So if you're listening out there, make sure you rewind and take some notes from what Bradley was just talking about. Because Bradley, it took me, I became an authoritative title manager when I was 20 or 21 with like 20 direct reports or so. And I remember the first time somebody challenged me publicly. You know what he did? It was embarrassing. He was
Mm,
doing the job a little longer, but I was now his leader, boss, we'll call it. And I was still learning leadership. So I might have been more like a boss. You know what he said to me in front of everybody? You effing Nimrod. And it just, dude, I thought I was about to knock him out. I thought maybe this is how I let everybody know that I'm the leader. Maybe I, make an example of him. And I remember saying, I said, I'm not even going to respond to that right now. Go back and do your job, and I will talk to you in an hour. And I went
mm,
out, I left, went outside, cooled down for a minute because I knew responding then could escalate physically, whatever. We could both lose our jobs. I thought about some deep things because trust me, I actually wanted to respond either, you know, very loudly or physically because it was embarrassing. Mostly because I was embarrassed,
sure.
right? That's the truth is that I wanted to respond because of the way that I looked to everybody, how
Mm,
embarrassing it was. And by taking that hour, and then I asked him to go sit down in my office, and I joined him and actually earned his trust that day because a lot of times the way that we respond, would you agree that leadership is earned one step at a time, but you can lose 3 or 4 steps immediately by the way you respond emotionally?
without question.
So that gave me an opportunity to earn one step of respect with him and the team. And then I made it very clear that's not how we speak to people. I won't even engage it. And I won't speak to you like
Mm,
that. I put it on the spot. But in earlier, even before that, I started to learn that, wow, when I had a problem, I either A, addressed it aggressively and emotionally, or I didn't address it until it became aggressive and I blew up, and I had to learn that there's a better way. And I've
mm,
learned over the years, I actually have adopted, I don't know where it came from exactly, but I've adopted something that I teach in my leadership academy right now is that I want to create leaders that are like doctors and carpenters. Carpenters have great skills, great tools, but we never describe a carpenter by his tool. We never say Bradley's a phenomenal. We do describe leaders like this, though. We say Bradley's a phenomenal storyteller, communicator, recruiter, blah blah blah. We describe them like that. We should describe them more like carpenters. We should seek to be like a carpenter who has great tools that he uses to build great things and great people, bring the best out of people as a
mm,
carpenter. And then I adopted, I want to people leaders that are like doctors and carpenters. A doctor asks questions to diagnose the problem because Bradley, so many leaders misdiagnose the problem. They think they're so arrogant to think they have all the answers, a lot of us. Right. And I've been there in my career too that Bradley, I know exactly what's wrong with you. Let me tell you how to fix it, but I don't know. So if I stopped and I asked you, Bradley, tell me about, I don't, let's not use you. Bradley, your neighbor has a stomach ache, and he goes to the doctor. Doctors don't say, I know what the problem is. We're going to have to operate and remove your a foot of your intestine without asking any questions, doing any research, right? Doctors ask questions, do
mm.
research to find out what the diagnosis is so that they can deliver the correct treatment. And so many times, leaders' arrogance takes away from finding the diagnosis, which means they deliver the incorrect treatment, which means the problem is still there, actually, probably grows. So, that's what I've learned from what your storytelling has brought up again, and is that to be the doctor and the carpenter and take time, ask questions, right?
I think also
Add to
to
that.
continue with that analogy, especially I I think it was subconscious. I don't think it was a conscious thought, but I really felt like that certain business owners were just naturally gifted and naturally born.
Mm,
The reason why that was a limiting belief is because then if that's the case, if that is indeed true, well, Beau is just naturally gifted. He's just a naturally gifted leader. He's just a naturally gifted business savvy
mm,
guy. Okay. Or she is just naturally gifted. She was born in an entrepreneur's business and, like all of these kind of things. Right. So if we feel like, if we feel that
mm,
way, and I subconsciously did, then what it does is it limits the ability for me to acquire
Mm.
tools as a
Oh, so
carpenter
true.
and acquire skills. So ironically, my dad actually taught FFA and agriculture at my school growing up, and he
That's
actually
amazing.
one of the things we had to do was build a hat
Uh-huh.
rack. Okay, we had to build hat racks whenever you go to my dad's class, and so I didn't have that skill. And so, what did my dad I actually should do a podcast on
I'd
this
love to
actually.
hear it.
What did my dad do? He was like, "Oh, no, no, no. My son is going to have the best hat rack." He just built it for me. He just built it for me, like in
Mm.
class,
Mhm.
because he was like, "Oh, no, no, no. This is not good enough, Bradley. I'll just do it." So I never acquired the skill. Now, let me be clear about that one. I didn't want to either. Okay,
Right.
I didn't want to either. It
So
wasn't in
true.
my interest. But to close that loop, I'm saying that business and entrepreneurship, being a great business owner, being a great leader, is actually just a collection of a lot of
Yeah.
skills and a lot of skills and a lot of
Right.
tools. And so I think that that allows me to look at people who are ahead of me, and instead of me just saying, I can't be Beau. I can't be Beau. Actually, I'm looking at it saying, Beau has skills. He has tools. He even has a mindset that I can acquire. So it's mindset, skill set, tool set. I can acquire, I can adopt a
Mindset
mindset,
skills.
I can acquire the skills, and I can get the tools to be able to use. And I can eventually get there versus if I think he's just naturally gifted, well, then I can't do
Right.
that. I love basketball. I'm 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 six
Mhm.
five, but I'm not 6'9", 250 freight train like LeBron
Right.
James. I mean, that he was get that's God gave him that
Right.
ability,
Right.
right? Period. And so that those are things it doesn't matter how hard I work in the gym, I'm never going to be
You're
able to
never gonna
beat
be
him. I was
six
never going
nine.
to be able. No.
And I'll never be
Yeah.
6'5" either. I'll never be 6 foot. Jeez, Bradley. But no, those are great things, that you talked about. Did you say skill set, tool set? What say that again? You said 3 things.
Yeah, mindset,
Mindset
skill set,
skills.
tool set.
I love that. I love that. You always have such great advice, and you're like a sponge and of your own life, but also everybody that you interact with. I feel like you are a sponge, and I think our podcast. I'd have to rewatch it, which maybe should have just to prep for this, but I want to say I talked to you about how employees were seeking 2 things, and there was an invisible gray line, and you actually said it was 3 things. And I think it was you. And let me say this, and if it was you, take the credit. If not, you could just say, "Oh, that sounds good." But culture and compensation. There was an invisible gray line I wanted to figure out for every employee, and I could have swore it was you that said there was 3 C's. Is that you or no? Did I not hear it from you? Uh,
Oh, man, that every employee
yeah,
wants 3
yeah.
C's?
Oh,
Oh
was
gosh.
it not? It might not have been you. Um,
I do have a 3 C's framework, but I don't think it's in the context
okay,
of that though.
compensation, career development, and culture. So
No, but that
I don't
sounds
know where
great
I
though.
learned
I
it.
mean,
I
that
learned it
sounds
along
great.
the way, but I was able to. I know I talked about it a little bit on your podcast. I do know that, but yeah, I think it's important to think about those 3 things when we're leading other people. Is that actually they're wanting you to solve that, and if you are helping them solve it, it's extremely important. So,
Mm.
Bradley, this podcast is called The Conviction of a Leader. I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you. So I believe each leader, entrepreneur carries around convictions that help lead them. I used to have a long list of convictions, and actually, they've gotten smaller and stronger. And this season has brought something out of me that I would like to share my first and then ask you yours. But my newest, strongest conviction as a leader is actually I've learned that as a leader, I believe that I'm called to help other people find who they are and who they were called to be. And that's it.
Mm.
So I made it very simple, very directly to the point. But has there been any convictions that have really just stuck with you as a leader, entrepreneur, that have carried you, guided you along the way?
Yeah, I'm gonna share with you one, and I'll share with you I haven't used the word conviction, so that actually gives me something to
Hmm.
ponder myself post this podcast. I have thought about this that over time, it's like the more that I experience, the more that I've been a part of, the more that I realize how much more there is to
Mm.
learn. And so specifically with that, what I'm saying is I used to have a lot of hills I was willing to die on.
Yeah.
Meaning I fundamentally believe this about business, and Beau, you're not knocking me off this hill. And almost little by little by little, I've been proven wrong. I've been proven wrong. And to say, you know what? Actually, that was not true. I'll give you a specific one, and then I'm going to share with you the one that is a conviction or a hill I am willing to
Mhm.
die on. Is I used to think you got to hold back equity. You have to hold back equity. Do the last thing before you ever bring a partner into that business, man, be really careful with just doling out equity. And that's proven to be
Mm.
wrong. Like I used to be a big believer of carry 100% equity of the business, and now I fundamentally believe because I've seen it in several times just in the last several years, where co-founders or three
Mhm.
founders or whatever have been able to do so much more than one
Yeah.
person. So that was an example. It was like that was proven wrong. But the one I am willing to die on is I believe the one thing you can never delegate is the vision and the direction of
Mm.
the company. You can never delegate that. You can never get rid of that. The founder, the CEO has to own the vision of the company. You're not going to go to your team and say, "Hey, sales producer, you're really killing it. You're having a great year. By the way, I was just curious, where would you love this business to go? What's your vision of this business? That sounds like a great idea. I'll just adopt that." And so I believe everything is downhill from that. Everything. Where is this thing going? Honest to goodness, I won't share who it is. I was on a call yesterday, so I'm flying up to Minnesota in June of this year to work with a client. It's three co-founders. They two of them are husband and wife, so they own about 67% of this company. The other one owns 33%. And the last 3 years or so, 3 to 4 years, they were so focused to get to this specific
Mm.
number, and they did it. They had a vision, they had a direction. One of the equity holders, the more that they hit tranches in the business, like revenue numbers, the more he got a tranche or additional equity, basically, and it kept building, right? And so they got there, and they are in this period of transition where they're all looking around at each other saying, we have no vision of where this thing is going now. Like we actually achieved everything we were wanting to achieve. And so for the next 9 weeks, I've got homework for them to do individually by themselves to begin to think through where do they want the vision of this company to go. And the 2 days we'll spend together is literally going to be around nothing else but actually articulating the vision and the direction of that company, because then everything else, building the sales team, marketing channels, leadership management levels that are going to be in place, are they going to look to exit the company, are they going to build to, like what are they going to do? And they're in I don't want to say they're in like the wilderness. Basically, they're like, we don't really know. I mean, we're doing the things, and yeah, all this stuff sounds good, but they don't have a unified direction on the leadership team. And so that's what we're going to be working on. So that's the one conviction that I have, is that as leaders, no matter what, you have to have a vision for where the business is going. And specifically, I like 3 years to give people even a more
Mhm.
tangible 3 years from now. What do you want to have happen? And I'll give a little bit of a detail kind of into that, just so people have an
Yeah.
idea. As I love for you to think, it's April the 19th when we're
Yeah.
recording this, and it's 2024. And so, Beau, if it's April of
Mhm.
2027 and you can be anywhere in the world and you're watching the sun set on that
Mhm.
day, and you got a glass of bourbon
Yeah.
or wine or whatever
Uh-huh.
your favorite beverage
Mhm.
is in your hand, and you're wherever you want to be in the world. I've had people say Hawaii, Nevis, Barcelona. Some of them have said their lake house. Some of them have said, Alaska. I mean, it's all over
Right.
the place, right? And they're watching the sunset on that
Mhm.
day. And it's 3 years from now. And as they're with their family, they're like, man, I am so happy with the progress we've
Yeah.
made, both me personally and in the business. And I get people to say, well, what is
Mhm.
that? What is that
Identify
thing?
that.
What
Yeah.
are those things, those bullet points? Identify that. And then it becomes to get so crystal clear then everything else can be downhill
You
from
know,
there.
that's interesting that you chose 3 years. I actually heard a study that says every 3 years you change as a person. Have you ever heard that?
No, I
Yeah, there's a
haven't, but
study
I
that
would
you should
believe that.
reintroduce yourself to people every 3 years that you haven't spoke to in a while because they have
Hmm,
changed and so have you. And obviously, we're people like us who are kind of driven to be the best version of us, maybe turned off by people that don't change every 3 years. If you think about it, so
hmm,
a lot of the friends that I've lost or confidants over the years is because they didn't change. They stayed where they were
hmm.
and I changed, which actually either A turned them off to me or I to them. And I love that you chose 3 years without even knowing. It's a perfect almost a perfect number based
Yeah.
on the studies that I've read. But wow. So Bradley, that was some great advice. Actually, I was almost terrified you were going to say, Beau, now you go. Tell us, where do you pick yourself? So, I mean, honestly, I can tell you this though, that I do believe that God has blessed me with some dreams that I have worked very hard at, and I've seen them come to fruition, but it was only because he's laid them on my heart and gifted me. And
Mm,
and actually, I have found the ability to look in the mirror and help uh, increase, I guess, where I'm at today. But ultimately, it was because of God creating me and putting me in this on this path that I was able to see. So I'm thankful for that. But I would tell you this: that in 3 years, I do hope that I'm still at the house that I just bought recently on the back porch watching the sunset. And the most important thing that I could think of, I could dwell on my business too, but I also just praying to God that my now 17, almost 18-year-old son is still there, still respects me. That my son
mm.
that's 12 is 15 still looks up to me. Kind of like in the Bible, it says that, the disciples asked Jesus, who is the greatest of these? And they say, and he says, he calls a child over and he says, this child. So I hope that my kids still look up to me with some childlike faith in their father, that I'm not a failure to them, but they can see that through my flaws that they still love me and respect me. And my wife and kids, that's what I pray, that I never sacrifice that for my business first and foremost. Secondly,
Oh, man.
that my business, that the conviction of a leader is still growing in the direction, and thousands of people are impacted by then, and that they have found who they were meant to be. So I could spend more time dwelling on it, but that was my first thought. So what a thought provoking. If you're listening to this podcast, I would ask you to take another second to pause it and start to think, because Bradley, man, I love it. Good job. Good stuff for real. Thank you for adding that kind of value
Well,
to the podcast.
oh, well, you're welcome. Well, I think God is always faithful even in our trials and
Oh,
tribulations.
so true, man. So, you know what? What advice do you have for the younger Bradley or those out there that are seeking to, have equity in multiple businesses or buy their first business and just want to be maybe just a leader for the first time or entrepreneur? What advice do you have for those out there?
I would say get in the room and sit at the table with other people that are doing what it is that you want to
Mm,
do.
that's great
I know that
advice.
sounds super
Hmm.
simple. That's the best investments that I've made for me personally and
Hmm.
professionally, have been making in the investments in myself and being in the room and sitting at the table with other people that are doing exactly what
Mm.
I need, what I'm trying to
We,
do. That's simple
mhm.
advice, but whatever it takes to be able to do that and get proximity to the people that you look up to in business, that you look up to personally. I think that, like, the ability Zoom has given
Oh,
us and
huge.
remote teams is incredible, but there's nothing that will ever replace. And look, I'm trying to use AI more at different times, but I think the more that we adopt things like that, the more value there's going to be in in-person
Mm.
interactions.
So true.
By the way, I'm a big hugger. So if I saw you, like, I'd see you and I'd give you a big, like, man hug.
I want it.
That's
I
how I
want it.
am together with people, you know? So, but yeah, that's what I would do. Be in the room and at the tables.
Let me ask another question to that, because I know a lot of listeners might be thinking this, and maybe they're not, but I think I would be thinking this if I was 20 years ago. Bradley, I don't have a lot of money to sit in these rooms for masterminds, and I don't know how I'm going to get in a room where people are much more successful than me. Because what if they have the same thought, Bradley, where they're thinking they want to be in a room with people that are smarter, greater along the path and journey than them? How do I sneak into that room? How do I get into those rooms?
if you're going to, if you want, well, first of all, if you're a business owner, an entrepreneur already, you will make the time and make the money for the things that are
So true.
important to you. Now, to your point about people who are not an entrepreneur yet but want to do that, go work for an
Mm,
entrepreneur. The best way to do it is to go work for an
wow.
entrepreneur and actually be in a small business versus, like, that's the thing, is that I didn't say this, but I was in corporate America. My dad's a small business owner. You would think that I had, and I even got my degree in finance from Auburn. So I had these things that you would think would level me up, so to speak, to be prepared for owning a small business. Nothing could be further
Mm.
from the truth. Nothing could be further from the truth. I was running the first several years of my business, the bank accounts or the financials through Quicken, not QuickBooks, Quicken. And my accountant said, "Hey, you need to run this through QuickBooks." And I was like, "What's the difference?" And then he was like, "Well, you need to have a P&L." And I was like, "Well, wait, what is a P&L?" And the first time I mean, seriously, this is embarrassing to say, but it's the honest truth, is that he said, congratulations, you made $32,000 in profit this year. And I said, fantastic. Where's that money? And he was like, what do you mean, where's that money? I was like, where is that? I need
Yeah.
that money. And he was like, well, you spent it. And I was like, what? I don't understand. You just said I made profit of $32,000. I have like $100 in my checking account. I don't get it. What are you talking about? And so, like, all of those things I had to
Mm,
learn. That's what I'm saying. Early on, I had to struggle through all of those kind of things, and then I put myself around people that actually knew what they were doing. So if you work for someone like Beau and you want to be a business owner, regardless of the business, here's the thing, or regardless of the
right.
industry, I think just being around, what does it actually look like to own a small business, have 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 50 employees? That's what it actually looks like versus the academic world, the corporate world, the corporate books, those sort of things. Great. Maybe we can pull some principles from it, but you will never really actually understand what it looks like as a small business owner, entrepreneur, to wear all of the
Mm.
hats that you have to wear unless you actually experience it and work for somebody.
Dang.
So that's
That's
what I would do.
great advice. For real. That's great advice. No one's ever said that. I love when I hear advice that's slightly different, but that's totally different. Bradley, I was in the corporate world up until 4.5 years ago. I think it's been 4.5 years as a business owner. And I grew and grew in the corporate world until my last position, almost 600 employees, 40 million in revenue, and a P&L that I oversaw with two district managers in a multiple locations in a warehouse distribution center. And I thought this is as close as it's coming to owning a business. And guess what? It was nothing like it. And I treated it like I owned it. The thing is, Bradley,
Mm,
no matter how much you treat somebody else's business like you own it, you don't own it. And it is a little bit different.
yeah.
But Bradley's advice, like getting to go work for an entrepreneur or a small business owner, is huge, because that is like a one step in the right direction. Could you potentially earn more short term in the corporate world? Yeah, maybe. But could you earn more long term by learning from an entrepreneur or business owner? Most likely they will teach you in the avenue that you want to learn and grow in. And Bradley, the more you grow in the corporate world, it got harder and harder for me to leave. And I was 34 with 3 kids, my dream house, great salary, company car, investment account that they put into every quarter. And to leave that was extremely hard. I almost didn't do it. So
Yeah.
that's great
Yeah.
advice, man. Seriously. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining today. And I will make sure to put in the show notes every single way that they can follow you, listen to your podcast. Is there anything else that you would like to leave with them today?
No, check out our
Yes.
podcast, abovethebusiness.co. They can check out the episodes that we
Mm.
have there. We drop a Monday interview with guests like Beau often, and then they can check out more about what we do at blueprintos.com.
Bradley, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you all for listening today. Listen, if Bradley made an impact on you, I want you to stop. I want you to share this podcast. I want you to share with your friends, family members, coworkers. Please do me a favor, share it. It's free. If you think that it'll impact anybody by the words that he shared today, please share it. Also, if you have a chance, shoot him an email and tell him how much it meant to you to hear from him today. Also, like, share, turn on notifications for this podcast. Means a lot to me, means a lot to all the guests that come on. Thank you, Bradley. Thank you all for listening. Have a great day.
Bye bye.